As customer experience moves to the very core of how companies think about their relationship with customers, the role of the contact center has become a critical linchpin to success. To get an edge, companies are looking to technologies such as artificial intelligence and cloud solutions to improve capabilities, reduce costs, and gain end-to-end integrated view of the customer. Contact centers are increasingly central to supporting and enriching the end-to-end relationship which organizations have with their companies. That's one of the issues we'll be addressing today. So good morning and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Andrew Birmingham. I'm the editor-in-chief of Which 50, and my guests today understand these issues deeply. Stuart Tucker is the Chief Customer Officer of HiPages. Jim Chrysakos is the National Solutions Manager at NEC Australia, and Cameron Adams, who's coming in from Singapore, is the Director of Solutions Consulting and Architecture at NICE, and they'll be helping us interrogate these issues today. As you listen to our speakers today, we encourage you to add your own questions, and the way that will work is we'll collect the questions through the broadcast, and we'll take the questions at the end rather than interrupting the flow of the discussion. The webinar as well will also be available online after we have finished as well. Today's webinar is also the first in a series of 3, and we'll be looking at the issues from a fairly high level. Next week, we're going to dive a bit deeper and divide the conversation into 2 streams based on the feedback from our readers. For our readers in sort of enterprise companies and private companies, there'll be one stream, and for those in the public sector, there'll be another based on the different needs that you've identified. The webinar focusing on enterprise, for instance, will look more deeply into issues such as innovation, the impact of new technologies, and maximising the performance of the sales teams. For our public sector audience, we'll also be covering the innovation angle, which is important, but diving a bit more deeply into some of the security and data governance issues that you've raised, as well as having a bit of a chat about some of the sort of budgeting issues, particularly around cloud computing. The investments organisations make and how they support and service customers can have a profound impact on customer experience and drive brand loyalty, frequency of purchase, and help to reduce customer churn and lower operational costs. Today, 9 out of 10 organisations see customer experience as a key differentiator. The challenge, of course, is converting these vision statements into executional strategies, and this is where the contact centre can play a fairly outsized role. We're going to start exploring these issues today, and to begin with, I'm going to begin with Stuart Tucker. Stuart, welcome to the broadcast. And Stuart, you might have to take yourself off mute. Okay, Stuart, do we have you there?
Yes, can you hear me, Andrew?
Yeah, we're all good, Stuart. So
good.
Just to begin, can you just start, for the benefit of our audience members who are not so familiar with HiPages, can you just tell us a little bit about the business and also talk about the role of inbound and outbound contact centres at HiPages?
Yeah, of course. Well, Andrew, for those who don't know, HiPages is a digital marketplace for Australians to find trusted tradies. And it's a big industry. Our research tells us there's about 70 million jobs conducted every year by roughly the 9 million households in Australia. But we also know that it's a really outdated industry. So HiPages looks to use technology to bring together tradies and homeowners in a really efficient and trustworthy way, which we do via our app and online. My role as Chief Customer Officer covers sales, service and marketing at HiPages. So we see most of the customer interactions. In terms of call centres, we have an extensive service infrastructure to support both sides of our marketplace. So we, like double-sided marketplace, we have tradies on one hand and consumers or homeowners on the other hand. The first port of call is into our Manila call centre, which we use in a BPO arrangement up there. We've had our service centre in Manila operating for about 5 years. They do mostly service, admin and some outbound sales. For escalated or complex issues, they then come into our service centre here, where we have a very expert team here who are very, very well skilled at handling the more complex issues that come in from consumers and tradies. We also have a telephone-based sales team here in Sydney, which really includes acquisition, customer development, and also retention. So we've got a good spread between on and offshore, inbound and outbound, and sales and service.
So thank you, Stuart. So one of the things you and I have discussed before this event is the sort of changing nature of customer experience as really kind of an emerging competitive battleground. And I thought it might be interesting to set the context for today. If you can kind of talk about or describe where the contact center sits in the sort of the overall relationship that you have with your customers. So sort of moving away from this idea of contact centers as a discrete standalone idea, and maybe talk about how it actually fits into the overall journey of the customer.
Yeah, it's a good question. And for a predominantly digital business, most of our customer experience happens in-app or online. And that's the way we prefer it, and so do our customers. But then they seamlessly migrate in and out of our channels every day. So whether it's app, email, call center, push messages, and then even a messaging center they can use either between their customers or between themselves and our service center. So it's really important that their experience is consistent through all of those channels. But when they need us, that's when they have problems, that's when they call us or message us. We handle about 25,000 chats with consumers every month, and around 10,000 calls, 20,000 messages, and about 1,500 emails with tradies monthly. And as I said, it's when they've got a query or a question, you know, in their day-to-day actions, they don't need to communicate with us regularly. But if they want something solved, then they come to us at the time and the moment that it suits them the best through the channel that it suits them as well. And it's critical that we really provide high levels of service to our customers in these situations. And regardless of whether they're coming in to our offshore centre or our onshore centre, it's important that they're having a consistent experience. And we've worked really hard with our team in Manila to make sure that, you know, that they are representing HiPages as if they were sitting here in Sydney, and you know they really genuinely love looking after our customers. So I guess to summarise there, the customers are just migrating seamlessly through all of our channels, but when they need us they can contact us through however they need, and you know we're happy to service them in that regard. And in fact we provide a very high level of service to both sides of our platform.
So one of the things I wanted to go through in a few minutes, we're going to have Jim and Cameron sort of go into quite a bit of detail around some of the sort of technology impacts. But one of the things I wanted to get you to talk to today, particularly given the nature of your role, is to see how you see the role of the contact center evolving, but also talk about how the perception of contact centers has changed and the perception of the value that it brings to the business, how that's changing.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I've spoken before about the high level of service we provide to our customers, but that comes at a high cost, and we've probably been hand-holding our customers, you know, particularly the tradies, possibly for too long, and they've become very dependent on our service team. So we're working really hard to redesign the user experience in our app to really put the power back in the hands of the tradies to take control of the settings that they have with us, so they can adjust their profile, download photos, adjust their driving distance, change the categories that they want to receive jobs in. They can now do that at their fingertips through the app. So we've found that the traders have jumped on this pretty quickly, and they're really embracing the benefits of self-service, because I guess they're used to self-service from their bank or their airline, so it's a fairly natural progression. We've also added phone-based account management to our most valuable tradie customers. So on one hand, we're trying to reduce the day-to-day, maybe more transactional or admin-y touch points, so we can invest at the other end to give high touch, you know, deep engagement, relationship type service to the customers who are our most valuable and our most loyal customers. And I guess, you know, in summary, the way that it's changing, Andrew, for us at HiPages is that we're trying to automate the day-to-day processes so we can focus on the moments of truth or the most impactful touch points. And we're seeing the benefits of that. We're seeing self-service adopted pretty rapidly by an audience that's not necessarily known for their technical capability, and we're seeing the benefits of being at high touch at the other end of their experience. So it's quite a significant change for us in the way that we see our call centres and the way that we're dealing with customers.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, we've found as we've been doing quite a bit of research into the sort of call centre, contact centre market this year, a lot of interest around things like chatbots and the implications for with AI and machine learning. And I'm not familiar with where HiPages is on that journey, but I'm really interested in terms of what your perception is of the value that technologies like that might deliver. So if you are doing it, if you can talk about what you're doing, and even if you're not doing it, where you think it kind of fits in to the overall picture.
Well, yes, I think it's a logical extension to what I was talking about before, because if we want to automate and reduce the cost of the day-to-day activities, basically the simple queries or the simple requests that our traders and consumers are asking us, and if we're trying to reduce our cost to serve, it's a pretty obvious next step for us to automate through chatbots, AI, a lot of those simple queries. So we've already, I suppose, become more efficient by handling more calls, multiple chats simultaneously than a telephone call. And the next most logical step is to apply those kind of automation tools. We'll be working pretty hard on that, probably starting from first quarter next calendar year. And we think that a large percentage of our customer queries can be handled basically with a chatbot.
So thanks, Stuart. A final question for you, because the other thing which has sort of come through sort of loud and clear, I guess, is the nature of the role of the agents and how that will change. I'm just interested, if you sort of look at the job that your contact people centered, your people do today, and the job that you need them to do in future, is your sense that the nature of the people who work in contact centers will change and the capabilities that they'll require will change?
I think that's a great question, because I guess in the past, a lot of contact center workers were following rules or, pretty well documented answers to customer queries. But I guess if we're going to automate or push out self-service, the low touch, the average call center representative is going to have to be much more empathetic to customers' needs and much more of a problem solver than just a query answering person. So it'll probably change the way we recruit and train and onboard our call center staff, both onshore and offshore, because they'll need to be learning to be much more empathetic, listening to customer needs and solving their problems rather than giving them a rote answer to a simple question. So it's probably a big shift, really, overall, both culturally and the way we recruit and train. So I think it's a very good question.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for your contribution. I'm going to move the conversation along now to Cameron. Cameron, just checking we're all set up and unmuted, which is good. So, Cameron, one of the things I'd like to do is drill into some of these issues in some detail. But before we do that, I thought it'd be interesting to get you to comment on how Stuart's experience at HiPages matches with that of your other customers who you talk to.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of set of challenges and solutions that Stuart went through there, and kind of the shape of the organization, the customer service organization at HiPages really resembles very much what we see as we have the opportunity to visit contact centers in a range of different industry verticals. I think, it was very interesting to hear Stuart talking about introduction of self-service and automation in order to try and drive out lower value, kind of simpler types of inquiries. That's a journey that almost every contact center that we speak to has been on for some time. And I think there've been a variety of different results out of those efforts. When I talk to some financial services institutions, for example, they've taken the time to build, in many cases, highly functional and capable mobile apps that are able to enable people to do a lot of self-service. But in many cases, they aren't seeing the delivery of benefits in terms of call volume reduction in their contact centers that they'd banked off the back of these digital initiatives. And many of them are really asking why that is. It's a very difficult question to answer, and one that, organizations look to analytics potentially to try and solve. It's also really interesting to hear that sales, service, and marketing all sort of fall under Stuart's remit. That's something that is kind of an emerging trend that we've seen a recognition that there is just one conversation that organizations are having with their customers, and that conversation ranges from when that customer is researching all the way through to when they're buying and servicing and renewing and all that sort of stuff. It's one conversation, and it doesn't make sense for siloed functions to be addressing parts of that conversation separate to one another. So we're seeing a real trend of bringing those functions together around dialogue with a customer. So yeah, lots of interesting kind of aspects of what HiPages is up to.
And just to sort of address that AI chatbot piece and that idea of the changing role of the agent. So in a conversation I had with the head of customer experience at one of the large insurance companies, we were chatting about how that person saw the role changing. And what he was saying is basically the chatbots and the AI will account for a lot of the sort of the general queries that come in, and the kinds of queries that get through to the agents would be more complex and more difficult. I'm just wondering if that's something that you see as well, and how you see the role of the agents changing in that context.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the move to more sophisticated mechanisms to provide self-service is absolutely continuing to drive up the complexity of inquiries into the contact center, and it is reaching, I think, in many organizations, a bit of a critical point that is really challenging the traditional workforce. You know, there's so much complexity in the inquiries that really great problem solvers, very effective troubleshooters are required even in just general inquiries kinds of jobs. And, you know, I think there's been a round of organizations getting their heads around how do we deploy AI and how do we use chatbots to service customer inquiries. And I think that the first round or experience of that has seen it being used in many cases like a very sophisticated IVR that is able to solve a lot of problems through a conversational kind of interface and triage those inquiries before they get through to customers. One of the emerging trends that I think is just coming out at the moment that affects the way that agents work is I think we're going to see the introduction of chatbots and AI and conversational self-service interface into the live agent interaction in a couple of different ways. One is around helping the agent to drive simple portions of the conversation when they're interacting through a text channel like asynchronous messaging or chat, so that agents become sort of orchestrators of a conversation as much as, you know, maintaining the entire conversation themselves. A bot may be dipping in and out and improving their efficiency further still. And the other angle that we're seeing that is helping agents to deal with that complexity is providing conversational self-service interfaces to agents, an employee virtual assistant that can help agents solve those really complicated problems that are coming in from customers with much greater access to knowledge.
Fantastic. So just before I get into the next section, we start drilling into specifics. We're starting to have some questions come in. So again, thank you to our audience members for that. And just a reminder that we'll address those questions at the end of the general discussion. So Stuart, one of the next questions I wanted to ask you is, when you think about the expectations organisations have about the changing role of their contact centre, can you describe some of the limitations of the current approaches and the problems that those limitations cause?
Well, I guess there's an issue around single customer view. So how can we adequately be capturing all the interactions with customers beyond just, you know, X customer called on X day and this was the outcome? How can we build in sort of sentiment scoring? And so as they're navigating their way through our different channels, all of our reps or anyone who speaks to that customer, in fact, it could even be a machine or a person, knows where that customer stands with us. So how do we empower all of the reps and all of the touch points to have a single customer view? That's definitely a limitation. And then, of course, you've got a cultural or a skill set limitation where, of course, we have very high expectations of our service providers today. So regardless of the tenure of the rep, whether they're having a good day or whether there's something going on at home or whatever, we really expect them to be giving the highest level of service to our customers with every interaction. And I think there's a human variable in there as well. So I guess I've probably by chance just spoken about one technical variable and one human variable that can really make it quite difficult to live up to the customer expectations in terms of great service.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to go into now, we've talked a little bit about the impact of things like AI and chatbots, but the other technology which seems to have a fairly transformative impact in this part of the world is cloud computing. Now, both yourselves and NEC are in the market with cloud-based approaches to contact centers. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of describe how that cloud-based approach differs or improves upon, say, an on-premise approach. Jim, sorry, Cameron, I think you just muted yourself there. You just need to unmute yourself.
Got a bit stuck on mute there. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, we got you back. So I just wanted you to just discuss that idea of how a cloud-based approach differs or improves on an on-premises approach, because I think people see it as quite a transformational idea.
Yeah, it is, and it is about transformation because we talked about the increasing complexity of specific inquiries dealt with by agents, but actually, the need to be able to help customers across a range of channels, and Stuart talked about 4 channels that HiPages wants to create a consistent experience across, has just driven more and more complexity into the on-premise technology landscape. And we see that as becoming a huge impediment to the sorts of transformative activities that organizations are looking to undertake, because it becomes really, really difficult to stitch together a single view on a customer, an understanding of that customer's journey, a window into all of the dialogue that you've been having with that customer across multiple channels, when those channels are serviced by disparate and siloed on-premise technologies. So, it extends to understanding those customers. It's a real limit on the pace of innovation when organizations that fundamentally are retailers or are financial services or government are trying to play the roles of system integrators with their own on-premise technologies. So what cloud computing and a cloud-based approach to contact centers offers is basically an ability to take away all of that complexity of managing integration, the challenges of having to constantly adapt to changes in scale demands across different channels as customer contact preferences change, and really just unlocks a huge range of possibilities of innovation, not just from the new capabilities that live inside a leading cloud contact center platform, but also from the wide range of other interoperable cloud services that exist that can be easily integrated with to provide some really great additional value and really enable that transformation to meet customers where they want to be, to understand the conversation that you've had with them, and be able to solve their complex problems quickly.
Thanks, Dale. I've got one more question for you before I bring Jim into the conversation. Now, one of the things that sort of strikes me as a strength of NICE is its focus on analytics and providing a better understanding of the interactions between the customers and the organisation, and indeed the relationship between the customer and the agent. Now, does a cloud-based approach make that access to the data, make getting access to the data needed to tease out those insights easier? And just as importantly, getting access is one thing, but does it accelerate the process of turning those insights into action?
Yeah, it absolutely does on both counts, because a cloud-based approach, particularly a cloud-based approach where the contact center core platform is part of a unified suite that includes analytical capabilities, it means that the data is stored in a centralized way. It's highly usable, and there aren't barriers to moving that around. so that you can get access and insight much more quickly. It means also that adjacent kind of technologies are easier to implement. A good example of that is organizations looking to get efficiency from authenticating customers biometrically in a cloud-based platform. It's something you can check a box on, turn on voice biometric authentication capability, whereas in the old world, even just trying to get at the customer voice in real time is a massive system integration project to be able to deliver that sort of thing. So from analytics to authentication to insights and automation, I think, cloud platforms really just make it much easier to move the data around and make those integrations work.
Fantastic. Now, Cameron, I'll get you to stick around because I think some of these questions might be relevant to you when they come in.
Of course.
What I do now is bring Jim into the conversation. So, Jim, if you can just unmute yourself now. What I wanted to do, Jim, was really start to drill into some of the issues around the impact of cloud computing on contact centers and more widely on customer services. And where I wanted to start was this: for organizations that are committed to really delivering end-to-end customer engagement, how does a cloud-based approach facilitate that better than, say, an on-premises approach? And from the perspective of culture change for an organization, what are the things that they need to consider if they're going to move from on-premise to cloud, and what gets in the way of them doing that successfully?
Okay, so good questions. So in terms of the cultural change, I'm experiencing this myself with the current platform. So let me just frame this answer for a second. When I refer to a cloud platform, I'm looking at it from what I call a second generation cloud platform, or a vendor supplied or provided and managed cloud platform. So the CX1 or the CX Plus solution, as we call it, provided by the vendor, that is maintained, lifecycle managed, and all the enhancements and features are added by the vendor. And what that means is they can leverage their economy of scales and provide these services ultimately back to our customers and back to their end users. Cameron touched on the fact that you don't require, culturally, you move away from having engineering discussions internally within your project teams, and you move forward and having business-focused conversations. That's the big scenario. That's the big difference. The other thing I think that may get lost in translation is the requirements around business cases and justifications changes as well, because being able to consume services in a sort of a just-in-time fashion as required means that you don't have to stand up a business case to deliver a particular function. You don't have to get investment for infrastructure, for integration, for people to do the work, and then for cutovers and that sort of thing. I'll give you a couple of examples. So a very basic but very real example that just happened recently is I've got a customer that wanted to switch on callback on one of their on-premise systems. And it took us about 6 months to work through the business case to identify what the return on investment was going to be, obviously the costs, the project schedules and all those sorts of things, and then turn that into a project and deliver. I then went away and asked one of our engineers, all right, so on this new second gen platform, how would you do it? And his response to me was simple. He said, basically, it's a script and I'll just enable it for a call flow. And that's the big fundamental change, is that you don't, this massive piece of technology work that has been occurring in the past now is quite small, and it's more business-focused conversation. And there are other examples, like being, the vendors now are innovating the platform themselves. So they're bringing out things like CRM connectors and unified communications connectors and those sorts of things, which again, I'm not going to oversimplify, but let's just say, for the sake of the argument, it's a checkbox that enables a Teams integration or a Salesforce integration. In an on-premise world, it's a major program of works to, you might have, for example, one CRM vendor, your contact center solution. You have to line the two up, enable the project, but after it's working, you've got to life cycle manage that for the term of however long you want it. Whereas nowadays, these vendors with these second generation platforms, these cloud native platforms, are doing that piece of work themselves. And I think, Cameron, I've seen a lot of trends, Andrew, in the contact center space over the last 20 years or so. You know, I've heard the discussion around omni-channel, and it's a real discussion. But if you speak to many of the customers these days, and we see that every day, is that the one barrier to having omni-channel, a true omni-channel contact center or customer experience platform is the data, the disparate data systems and the lack of integration and all that. But having that one cloud native solution and having that data in the one repository, alleviates that problem. Likewise, Cameron did mention analytics, right? So, the vendors now are getting smart about it, and they're infusing their analytics across their platform. So again, it's in an on-premise world, you would have been talking about months, if not years, worth of work to deploy analytics. In this new world, it's a matter of consuming as required, so to speak.
Thanks, Jim, for that. Before we go to the next question, just a reminder to the audience that if you have any questions for our panelists, you can enter those into the system, and we'll address those at the end of this part of the discussion. Jim, one of the reasons I was really keen to have you in here today, given your experience, is to actually get you to talk about the business drivers of the shift to cloud computing. So if you can sort of talk through what's actually sort of driving those companies to do that, but also talk about what's the impediments that they face and what do they need to do to overcome those impediments.
Okay, so I think historically, you could say that the initial thoughts from customers and the marketplace was the driver to cloud was to leverage the economies of scale of cloud platforms and get a commercial benefit out of it. And I think what we're seeing, and the latest research is now showing that the pendulum is the swing is stopping or is stabilizing. And there is still a financial benefit, but I think you've got to look out a long-term view. If you're looking at a 3-year business case to transition to cloud, you may not be able to recognize it. But if you look at a 5-year business case or longer, and you factor in a couple of technology refreshes within that business case, then there's definitely a commercial argument for moving to cloud. But I think what I spoke about earlier about the ability to consume new features as they become available and to be able to innovate very, very quickly is the key benefit. So, again, the basic example, if I wanted to start enabling callback, I could do that using just some scripting rather than having to spin up a big project work. And what that means is obviously, you become more dynamic and reactive, or you can become more dynamic and proactive in the marketplace. So you can respond to the market drivers, like, if your competitors, for example, are finding new ways to service their customers, which is giving them an advantage, you can obviously leverage the new platforms to meet that requirement, or you can start looking at ways of innovating and moving forward. So essentially what it means is this capability allows you to execute on your strategies much, much faster.
Thanks, Jim. One of the things in preparation for today's webinar was in chatting with contact center managers, both in sort of private or large enterprises and in government. I was sort of struck by the fact that sometimes the drivers are quite different between those two kinds of organizations. And we have a mixture in the audience today. And I'm just wondering if you could address how those drivers might be different for, say, a large enterprise compared to, say, a state government or a state government department.
I think it's almost a case of same but different. So, what I see in the marketplace is our government customers want to be as agile and as cutting edge as our enterprise customers, but they're under a lot of scrutiny from obviously citizens and the media. So their challenges around about how are we managing their data, how are we securing it, and then at the same time they get asked questions around why are your processes so outdated? Why is it taking so long? Why is it so difficult? Why are things so paper-based? Why aren't you moving into a digital strategy? And the government has an obligation, I think, obviously to protect the public purse and make sure that whatever money that they're investing from taxpayers' perspective, that that they're using adequately. And I think lastly on that point, one of the key things for government that is different from, I guess, the commercial world is they don't have expectation around revenue. So, where our commercial customers are looking to build and increase and improve their revenue, more around efficiency for the government. So, they get given a budget annually and they get an efficiency target periodically, and they've got to try and meet that efficiency target. And I think, again, looking back at the traditional world, if I'm sitting in a government enterprise or a government organisation and I've been given a 3% reduction in cost with the same budget or whatever, then I want to be able to execute on that very, very quickly. I don't want to be in a position where I have to spend 6 months justifying business cases, setting up a project, and only allows me 6 months to realise a benefit. So they're the kind of challenges where I'm seeing in the government space.
Okay, from the from the innovation perspective, so one of the things that sort of struck me again in doing preparation for today's webinar is that both the government contact center managers we spoke to and the enterprise contact center managers both sort of focus on innovation as important, and there might be a slight difference in terms of emphasis. But one of the things I wanted to understand was basically, do you see technologies like chatbots and AI and their capacity to transform the work of the contact center, do you see that as being discrete from, say, the cloud conversation, or are all those things all wrapped up in the same overall innovation story?
I think, how can I put it? Look, one, I think, misconception within the marketplace is if you're going to go to cloud, it's a all or nothing proposition. In other words, it's a lift and shift of everything to the cloud, and that's absolutely not true. I mean, one of the best approaches is, and your example of AI and chatbots is a really good one, is to trial out a cloud service on top of your existing on-premise to get a view of how it works, what the benefits are, the risks, the commercial impacts, and all that sort of stuff. And that's actually a very, very good migration approach to transitioning to cloud. I mean, we're working with a number of customers who are on premise today and want to move to cloud, but not sure how. We're looking at approaches where, and it's different for every customer because as you know, all these on-premise environments are all different. So there's a bit of tailoring in terms of the stories and the roadmaps that we need to put in place. But we work with them on finding various strategies to migrate a service at a time, or we might look at doing POCs to implement business units at a time, and then other POCs, for example, to implement CRM integrations or UC integrations and those sorts of things. So I think how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time is the answer.
So, Jim, a final question before we move on to questions from the audience. I'm interested in your perspective from the customers you've spoken to and the organizations you've spoken to who've made this kind of transition to, say, a cloud-based environment, and organizations, they feel they have the right infrastructure in place now going forward. What are the kind of benefits that have accrued to them as a result of getting that infrastructure piece right?
No, I think it's the innovation piece that I was talking about earlier. It's the ability to keep improving their business processes and using the new technologies to, improve the customer experience. That's the key benefit, right? The conversation's not necessarily about cost or licenses and that sort of thing. It's about the business value now.
Okay, thanks, Jim. In fact, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't mind, Cameron, if you're still with us, if you can take yourself off mute and also address that issue. So again, from the perspective of the customers that you've worked with, who you feel have got their infrastructure right, they've got that sorted, what's been the impact on their business?
I'd actually echo Jim's comments. I think, the conversation has moved on long ago from a conversation around infrastructure maintenance, upgrade costs and operational expenses and all of that stuff. And it's much more about enabling transformation and innovation at pace. And so the benefits that we're seeing from our customers is a willingness to try new things, because the barrier to entry is so much lower that they're able to try out new capabilities and fail fast, discover whether those things are really going to deliver value to the business or value to customers in terms of improving their experience, and scale it up as it proves itself. So we've seen that again and again with a range of different capabilities, from speech analytics to even voice of the customer program management, performance management and coaching and gamification and that sort of stuff. It's just these capabilities that previously were just far too costly and difficult to get your hands on, especially at sort of mid to smaller contact center scale. Now, just that much easier to adopt, try out, and succeed with.
Fantastic. Now, I do want to move the conversation along to a couple of questions from the audience. So I'll read the question out, and then I think, Stuart, I might even throw this one initially to you in terms of your own experience. So the question we have is, does anyone have experience in trying to change the way the customers interact with the business? And then I think the important part of the question, if you did do that, how did you go about driving that change? So I guess the culture piece. So perhaps from the HiPages experience.
Well, Andrew, I'll probably just refer back to what I was mentioning previously, where the behaviour that we had created, particularly with our tradies, was, I think they all had our call centre number just built into their quick dial, and probably between jobs or on their way home at the end of the day, they would call us and query some activity or query a job or whatever that would be. So the change that we were trying to drive was self-service, and we were basically trying to push service back into the app to A, reduce the number of calls, but then B, reduce the overall cost to serve. So first of all, driving from calls to message center was the first step, and then reducing even the messages that the tradies send us by doing the self-service. So the behavioural change there was to just start using, we used a lot of test and learn, and we would usually create a control group where we would push out new features, and then the tradies would start to warm to it, discover it, bit of discovery, bit of learning. We're available on the phone if they wanted to the first time, and then next time we say, hey, listen, you can do this yourself whenever you like. And we were able to pretty successfully drive that behavioural change over time, and it's still going. But we have now seen 40, 50, 60% of phone calls and messages reducing out of our call centre into tradie self-service, and we think that's a major breakthrough for us.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stuart. Jim, the same question for you, or a variation on this question for you. If you think of the customers and the organisations that you're working with, if you can think of an example where they, because you were talking about omnichannel before, where they have actually sort of tried to change the way that their customers can interact with them, and what were the approaches they took to managing that change? The approach that Stuart was describing there was almost a very kind of iterative approach. I'm just wondering if there are other approaches as well.
Sorry, unmuting. Look, listening to that question, it reminded of a particular customer who was in the utilities industry, and their situation is on an average day they would have about 30 agents which would handle their call loads. But if there was an outage, that requirement could instantly move from 30 to 600 agents, and of course that's a whole realm of problems. And through a bunch of integration and a lot of proactive messaging and marketing, the solution was really to be able to proactively message to callers, identifying, for example, where the calls come from, to be able to say, oh, we recognise there's an outage in your area, it'll be restored at such and such a time. And then they've integrated that same capability on their website and digital platforms, so their apps and all that sort of stuff. So they were able to, I guess, deflect a lot of the low value activity, if you like, by obviously some intelligent messaging, but also they were able to proactively make sure that, you know, in future they could message out to customers, or at least market to customers that there are other avenues for getting that same information available.
Fantastic. So I've got one more question, which I'm going to go across the panel to finish us all up today. A bit of context. I do a lot of work in the marketing tech sector, and one of the things we've noticed is there's been quite a change in the way that the marketing function is perceived as that function's become more measurable. It's become more clear the value that they're delivering. As the contact center workers are asked to do more difficult or more challenging work, and as the analytics allow us to kind of manage or measure the impact of that, do you see a world where the impact of the contact center managers and the department is more easily and more readily recognized by the company in future? I might start with Stuart on that one.
It's a good question. I think there's two parts of it. One is genuinely creating a voice of the customer approach within the organisation, and that naturally escalates the visibility and recognition of our call centres people. So, you know, we just create simple opportunities, whether it's feedback through our NPS scores or our CSAT scores. We flash it up on the screen, so all of our people, whether they're engineers or HR or finance, can hear the great things that our customers are saying about our reps, and that just helps to remind all of the business the contribution they play in keeping our customers happy and loyal. And I think the other part is we run quite successful cross-functional teams to solve big customer problems, and we always have representatives in there from customer service, and they are probably the most valuable people that we have in those teams, because they bring a voice of the customer and they hear feedback all the time about what we can do better. And they're also great at process design when we start going to market with the new ideas. So, you know, increasingly the call center people and the customer service experts are going from back of house to front of house and really getting much more of a voice. And I think it changes everything if you're going to try and be a genuinely customer-centric organisation.
Fantastic. Now, Cameron, for you, one of the things that sort of strikes me is the analytics become richer and more sophisticated. Does that make it easier do you think, for the contact center managers to describe the value of the work that they and their teams do, and to really measure the impact in terms of the bottom line of the business?
Absolutely. I think, you know, there are a number of different ways that being able to get insight into the content of conversations that are being held with customers at an aggregate level really helps with that value conversation. In most cases, contact centers are, you know, places that are full of mystery. People find it hard to explain why, you know, customers behave particular ways, why they are calling so often. You know, the power of being able to get inside a conversation is that the contact center can certainly prove the value that is being delivered by agents. So it can prove, you know, upsell, can improve education, you know, proving that those things are happening. But the contact center can also add really value to the remainder of the business as a rich source of insights about customers. You know, we talk about voice of the customer, and in most cases, we're talking about soliciting customers' feedback actively. You know, there is no more complete sort of insight into the voice of the customer than literally understanding their dialogue as they interact with your organization. So, you know, can help direct product development, can help inform whether marketing campaigns are effective or not, can help with process remediation. You know, there's just so much value that can be delivered back from the contact center if understanding can be shared.
And so a final question then, Jim, I won't ask you exactly the same question, but the variant on the question to my mind is, do you see a world evolving where, I think often in the past, the contact center was thought of as this discrete idea that was almost off to the side. Do you see us moving into a world where the contact center really kind of sits at the heart of that whole end-to-end customer journey?
That's a resounding yes. And the latest research, what it shows that, you know, over 80% of companies these days expect their revenue growth to come out of basically how they treat their customers. So, and if you look at the latest trends within the industry, omni-channel and customer experience were, the trends, of recent years. Nowadays, it's employee engagement. So, that's going to be driven down from the C-level right through the contact center management and down to the contact center agents. They're going to be probably the most important customer front door, customer-facing people in the business.
All right, so one final question, and Jim, I think just for simplicity, I'll throw this to you.
Sure.
The question about automation, basically. So we've talked about chatbots and machine learning, but the other sort of big issue I think a lot of contact center managers face is the application of automation to the work that they do. And is there an advantage, or are there advantages in a cloud environment that make automation an easier thing to execute and deliver?
Certainly within automation within services within the cloud platform, yes, there is, because I think obviously the automation tools are inherent and they understand how each technology piece or technology function works. So the delivery of automation within those platforms definitely will give a benefit. I think the other area where we're seeing automation is going to be a benefit is at the agent desktop level. I mean, the cloud solution is one thing, but an agent generally has a number of different systems on their desktop that they have to interact with, in some cases for the one call. So, in today's age, we still see situations where we're cut and pasting data from one system to another, or, doing manual follow-up tasks and that sort of thing, where automation, I think, is a given for those type of scenarios. That's going to be a big growth area, I believe.
All right, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the questions and the end of today's webinar. Just a reminder that we'll be back next week for two different webinars. One really looking at the issues that really resonate with large enterprises and private enterprises, and the other looking specifically at some of the issues around government. We'll have some of our panelists back, and we'll also have a new set of contributors. But I do want to thank Stuart, Jim, and Cameron for their time today. And I also want to thank our audience members and for your engagement and for your questions. I hope you have a good day, and thank you very much for your attendance today. Goodbye.